Hello everybody, thank you for joining us today's Distant Daf Yomi. Today's Daf is Bava Kamma Daf 81 Omid A. The conditions are that people shall have the right to graze their animals in forests. So what does that mean? In the footnote, Marim Bechoroshin, most commentaries translate Horoshin as forest. Alternatively, it might refer to ploughed fields. One may allow his animals to graze in such fields, provided that crops have not been yet sown there. And that's from the Shita Mechubeses. Even on private property, and that they shall have the right to gather wood from each other's fields to be used as animal fodder, and they shall have the right to gather wild vegetation for animal fodder in any place except for a field of fenugreek, and that they should have the right to pluck off a shoot anywhere for propagation and planting, except for olive shoots, and that the people of the city shall have the right to take supplies of water from a spring on a private property, even from a spring that emerges for the first time. So what does that mean? Meyan hayosi bitchila, a spring that emerges for the first time. Some explain that this refers to a spring that flows inside a city. Joshua stipulated that only the residents of that city may draw its water, not people from elsewhere, despite the fact that the source of the spring is outside the city, and that's from the Gaonim and the Rambam. Others maintain that this is an expansion of rights, not a limitation. In other words, anyone may take water from a spring located on private property, provided that they do not cause damage to the property, and that's in the Rashi and the Rabbeinu Yonatan of Lunel and the Meiri. Some commentaries distinguish between a spring that emerges naturally and a water source produced by digging. If a spring was dug out, the water belongs exclusively to the owner, says Tosfot, and that they shall have the right to fish in the Sea of Tiberias, i.e. the Sea of Galilee, provided that the fisherman does not build an underwater fence to catch fish, thereby causing an impediment to boats. So let's define that. An underwater fence. Yifroz Kela, build a fence, a Kela. Some explain that a Kela is not a fence, but a kind of fishing net, i.e. a small round net with a weight on the bottom, which is thrown into a large fish or a swarm of smaller fish. Ya'amid es hasfina, causing an impediment to boats. Some commentators interpret this phrase differently and explain that it is common for fishermen, especially in the Sea of Galilee, to stop their boats in the water and throw out a large durable net that surrounds the fish from all sides. After, the fishermen will join forces to draw up the net with its fish. This practice can yield a large catch, and was therefore prohibited, as the depletion would impinge on the welfare of those living close to the sea who depended on fishing for their livelihood. The Bible continues the list of Joshua's 10 conditions, and people shall have the right to relieve themselves outdoors behind the fence, even in a field that is full of saffron, a kalkon. So let's define that. Kalkom, and the earliest source for this word is apparently from the Sanskrit kunkuma, which was adopted into many other languages with an N to R shift, leading to forms such as calcom or crocus in Latin. And they shall have the right to walk in permitted paths, i.e. those paths that cut through a private field throughout the summer until the second rainfall, when crops begin to sprout, and they have the right to veer off to the sides of the road into private property because of hard protrusions. Let's see the Hebrew word for that. Yeditot. Yeseda. A hard protrusion. Some explain that when a well-traversed road dries out in the summertime, it is full of depressions and protrusions, which are called Yesedot in plural, literally meaning pegs. Alternatively, actual pegs were inserted in places where the road was wet, so that travelers could step on them and avoid treading in the mud of the road. And one who becomes lost among the vineyards shall have the right to cut down branches and enter an area of the vineyard, or cut down branches and exit an area of the vineyard until he finds his way back to the road, and that corpse with no one to bury it a mate mitzvah, acquires its place and is buried where it was found. The first condition mentioned in the Braita is that people shall have the right to graze their animals in forests. While Papa said, we said this only with regard to small domesticated animals, i.e. sheep or goats, that graze in a large forest of large trees. One of the conditions that Joshua stipulated upon the entry of the tribes into Eretz Yisrael is that people may graze their animals in forests. It is permitted to graze only small animals and only in a forest with large trees. And that's from the Rambam Sefer Nezikin Nizkei Mammon 5.3 Torah Choshen Mishpat 274. Small animals grazing in a forest of this kind would not destroy it, but in the case of small animals grazing in a forest with small growth, or large animals, e.g. oxen grazing in a forest of large trees, these practices are not permitted, as in either of these scenarios the practice would destroy the forest. And all the more so, it is understood that large animals grazing in a forest with small growth is not permitted. The Gemara discusses the next condition mentioned in the Braita, and that they shall have the right to gather wood from each other's fields. Joshua stipulated that people shall have the right to gather wood from the fields of others. This halacha applies only to inferior kinds of wood, e.g. thorn bushes, and only if they are moist and attached to the ground. Furthermore, it is permitted to merely cut them off, but not to uproot them. Rambam Sefer Nezikin Nizkei Mammon 5.3 Torah Choshen Mishpat 274, to be used as animal fodder. The Gemara comments, we said this only with regard to twigs and thorns and shrubs, as the field's owner does not care about these. But with regard to other types of wood, it is not permitted. And even with regard to twigs of thorns, let's see then the footnote, this is probably refers to the rest harrow. It is a thorny bush about 20 to 55 centimeters high, which is commonly found in fields and alongside streams. Its leaves are usually in clusters of 3, and its side branches are thorny and tend to spread out. And shrubs. This is apparently the common camel thorn. It is a thorny plant with plain, rounded leaves. It usually reaches 30 centimeters high, but there are some that reach a height of 1 meter. It can also be found in fields and salt flats. We said this only when they are attached to the ground, but when they have been detached by the owner, it is not permitted, as he has already claimed them for himself. And even when they are attached, we said this only when the twigs are still moist, and when they are completely dry, it is not permitted, as the owner requires these for firewood. Moreover, it is permitted only provided that one does not uproot the thorn bush or shrub from the ground, but it is prohibited to pull them out with their roots. The Gemara further discusses Joshua's conditions, and that they shall have the right to gather wild vegetation. Another of Joshua's stipulation is that people shall have the right to gather wild vegetation from any field, except for a field of fenugreek that was planted for animal consumption. This ruling is in accordance with the Gemara's second answer with regard to the apparent contradiction to the Mishnah. The commentaries write that if the fenugreek was planted for its stalks, it is also prohibited, says the Torah, a ruling that takes into account the Gemara's first answer as well. Rambam Sefer Nezikin Hilchot Nizkei Mammon 5.3 Torah Choshen Mishpat 274. For animal fodder in any place except for a field of fenugreek. Fenugreek. This is Greek hay, a low plant of less than 1 meter tall, of the Fabaceae family. It has hollow, hairy, light green leaves that are clustered in sets of 3, and white flowers. It produces thin pods of up to 15 centimeters that contain flat seeds up to around 5 millimeters. Fenugreek is usually cultivated for its seeds, which can be eaten or used in the preparation of many different spices. Its young branches are also edible as a spice after cooking. In many countries, fenugreek is also used as animal fodder and as fertilizer. The Gemara asks, is this to say that wild vegetation is good for fenugreek, and therefore the owner wanted to be left in his field? The Gemara raises a contradiction from a Mishnah that deals with diverse kind of climate 2.5. With regard to fenugreek that sprouted alongside various types of wild vegetation, in a case where wild vegetation grew in a field and the owner of the field is not interested in keeping it, he is not obligated to uproot it on account of the prohibition of diverse kinds. The same applies to fenugreek sown for human consumption. If wild vegetation sprouted in its midst, how can it be determined if a particular fenugreek field is sown for human consumption? If it is sown in rows, it is for human consumption. If it is sown haphazardly, it is for animal fodder. This halacha is in accordance with the explanation of Bava Kamma Daf, Sefer Zerayim Hilchot Chalayim 27-10, Shulchan Aruch Yoredeya 296-9. One is not required to uproot the vegetation, although it is generally prohibited to grow different species of vegetable together in one patch. If the species has a negative aspect on each other's growth, it is not prohibited. In this case, the wild vegetation may be left alongside the fenugreek because it is harmful to it, and the halachot of diverse kinds do not apply in the case of this kind. Rav Yirmiyah said this is not difficult. Here the Mishnah is referring to a case where the fenugreek was planted for its seeds. There the Braita that lists Joshua's condition referring to fenugreek planted for its stalks. When it is planted for its seeds, wild vegetation is bad for it, as it weakens the fenugreek and lowers its yield. But when it is planted for its stalks, the wild vegetation is good for it, as when it is situated among vegetation, it climbs on it and thereby grows to a larger one. If you wish, say instead another answer. Here the Mishnah is referring to a case where the fenugreek is planted for human consumption, and there the Braita is referring to fenugreek planted for animal consumption. Since the owner sowed the fenugreek for animal consumption, the wild vegetation is also acquired by him, as this too can be used for animal fodder. And how can we know if a particular fenugreek field was planted for animal or human or animal consumption, and thereby know that the vegetation may be planted and taken? Well, Papa said, if he planted it in rows, Misharei is the Aramaic word for a garden bed, in which seeds are sown in a straight line in a delineated area, so that there is enough space between the plants for one to tend to them as they grow. It is for human consumption. If he did not plant in rows, but planted haphazardly, it is for animal consumption. The Braita teaches that they shall have the right to pluck off a shoot. So what does that mean? Joshua stipulated that one may pluck off shoots of vegetation for propagation and planting, with the exception of olive shoots, which may be plucked off only up to the size of an egg. Some commentaries maintain that one may cut off a branch only if he leaves part of it, the size of an egg, attached to the trunk to the Torah. In the case of bamboo and grapevines, only branches above the lowest knot may be plucked off. Maman 5:3, Torah, Shulchan Aruch 274. Anyway, for the propagation planting, except for olive shoots, as this will cause damage to the olive tree. Rabbi Tachum and Rabbi Bereus explain this in the name of a certain elder. With regard to olive trees, one must distance himself by the size of an egg. So what does that mean? Rashi explains that when cutting off a twig, one must leave the size of an egg of the twig attached to the trunk, rather than cutting it all the way down. Others explain that only a small portion of the twig, the size of an egg, may be severed from the tree. Rabbeinu Hananel Siluramba. Technically, the Gemara means that one should not cut off part of the branch unless it is fully mature and thick, so that it can continue to grow after being trimmed. The minimum thickness of a mature branch is that of the size of an egg, says the Gaonim. From the trunk before detaching a shoot, in the case of reeds and grapevines, he may take shoots only from the place of the first knot and above. A knot is a place on the grapevine and other plant where there is a potential for branch growth. When a vine is cut above the knot, new branches sprout from the knot. However, if a vine is cut beneath the knot, it will no longer sprout new branches from the place where it was cut. And with regard to all other trees, when one plucks a branch from any tree other than an olive tree and a grapevine, he may take a branch only from the middle of the tree, not from the thin part, and only from the young soft branches, says the Torah. Furthermore, it's permitted to take only branches that do not yet bear fruit. Finally, one may not take branches that are directly exposed to the sun. The Rambam says in Zichin Hilchet Nizkei Mammon 5:3. Shoots may be taken only from the thick part of the tree. Ubo. There are several variations of this term. The Rashi reads Ibo and explains that the reference is to young soft branches. Rashi also cites another reading, Havo. He explains that this is related to Machbo, a hiding place. In this context, it refers to the thick part of the tree where many branches obscure the trunk, where there are many branches growing but not from the thin part of the tree. Furthermore, one may take from a new branch. With regard to many trees, their fruit will not grow on a new branch that has sprouted in the current year, even if it is very large. Consequently, cutting off a new branch does not cause an immediate loss, which does not yet produce fruit, but not from old branches which do not produce fruit. One may take from a place that does not face the sun. In many kinds of trees, the main growth occurs on the side facing the sun. Additionally, more fruits grow on that side and they ripen faster. Therefore, one who takes a branch from the sunny side of the tree will cause a loss to the tree's owner. That's the end of the Amud. Thank you for listening and all the best. Bye.